one of the interesting things is trying to help people to understand that in the transition from membership to citizenship, or often what I call being from called to called out, there is a sense in which they need to appreciate that this new environment called the Ekklesia is not designed to put them in a bubble of safety. Rather, it's designed to help them grow stature in the midst of trial, tribulation, and challenges.
Hello, and welcome to Unlock the Kingdom Within You. This podcast explores the profound truth about what it means to be born into the kingdom, not a religion. On this podcast, we challenge the religious and denominational norms which shackle us from expressing the liberty of Christ by exploring the kingdom, the Ekklesia, and citizenship. If you're born into the kingdom but lost in religion, then this channel is just for you. So thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe.
It was interesting because, you know, when I came to an understanding of the Ekklesia, it was at that time where the Lord said to me, but don't go out and talk about it and preach about it and teach about it. He said, I want you to concentrate on citizenship.
Yeah.
He goes, I've got enough people all over the globe doing that, but also it's gonna be one of those contentions that's just not going to be worth it in the end.
Yep.
And I recall, because even in our presentations, I used to deliver a presentation which we now call Unlock the Kingdom Within You. But in that presentation, I would just talk a little bit about the difference between a church and ecclesia, and it would just cause an uproar. It was as if I had said something foul about the church.
Yeah.
And all I'd simply done was on one slide, I'll present the actual difference of the word and the root meaning of it. And then on the other slide or two, I'd present the difference in thinking and outcomes of an ecclesia and a church.
Yes.
It caused all sorts of headache.
There you go.
And so what we do now is we place full emphasis on citizenship because it's an identity issue.
Yes.
And hopefully what we then do afterwards is we then to bring in the understanding of the ecclesia afterwards. Because if you understand you're part of a kingdom and you're a citizen of a kingdom, then the church does not fit in that. At some point, you're going to have to say to yourself, this is an institution, can't fit in this. There's got to be something that actually helps to bring this into reality and earth it.
Absolutely.
And that's what we hope tends to happen when people begin to take that journey.
Yes. And I think that's a practicality we're looking for. I think for us, we did a whole series on that, and we are done with that. We're not going back to that.
Yeah.
I tell anybody who wants to hear about it, get on the YouTube channel. You'll get the details of that conversation. Make up your own decision on what that means to you.
Yeah.
If it makes sense to you. And then I've always said this. I've always said, guys, the issue of being in the church or being in the ecclesia is not a sin issue. It's an impact issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the fact that certain people choose to remain in the church does not negate that they are our brothers. Neither does it make them sinners. Neither are they working for the devil. I said they've chosen to stay in a limited scope of a reality. And for those of us who've chosen to move into a certain dynamic, and this is my theory. And the theory works like this. A time came when David needed to pursue the Amalekites. And certain people decided to stay behind and watch the stuff. and when David came back, he didn't say, guys, these guys didn't come with us, therefore.
Yeah, they don't get spoils. He didn't say that.
No, he said, let them get spoils equally. And so I ultimately believe if we've seen the way God has worked over the years, let's not get distracted with who's staying in the camp. Let's go out and build what we are building. A day will come when they'll enjoy the spoils. And this will not be a debate anymore. But they cannot come to that date if we're spending time with them debating.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of walking and developing something else that they can eventually see the reality of. And so I believe this pattern is everywhere. It's with Gideon, it's everywhere. But there's always going to be that group of people, and we don't expect it to be a massive group. We just expect the impact to be so clear, so dynamic, that everybody can then say, now we understand. Now we see it. Now we will embrace it. And
I think as well, the interesting thing about that, which is why I concur so much with you on it, is that in order for I think the key three things certainly in our midst now is kingdom, ecclesia, and citizenship. Those are the three primary things.
Yes.
But I find it interesting, and I'm sure you're the same, how we're reading the issues of what's going on in the globe and seeing in effect how the necessity of us moving through the context of kingdom, ecclesia, and citizenship is making us fit for purpose within the context of the globe.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you why that is so profound and close to my heart. It took me a while to accept. You see, most people think that we really love the idea of our primary focus as TCC, which has been the power to produce wealth. Truth be told, going down that journey is probably one of the hardest decisions I've had to make because of what's associated historically with the church and discussing finance and economy and so on. And before we ever were able to embark on that journey, we had to experience God in a particular way to be convinced that this is the journey we should take. And to understand that the fact that it is contaminated, the fact that it is corrupted, is the very reason it needs light. And so we began to realize that our actual contribution to this greater economy, as you're saying, is that it's almost like this space called economy is like the Jebusite state, where the Jebusites have said, even the lame and the blind will repulse you from here. You're not allowed to come here. Do everything else. I often say that the thing that really concerns me about the Jebusites, and I've taught a lot on the 7 giants, from the perspective of internal issues, not external giants, right? In terms of each representing a certain attitude we have that makes it difficult for us to possess that which God has literally called us to be. Now, I've said that the strange thing about the Jebusite is that that's the one giant that, as you go into the book of Samuel, says the tribe of Benjamin failed to remove them and lived at peace with them. And this is the one giant, by the time David is coming for them, is resident in Jerusalem. And it's almost like this is the one giant that lives alongside the nation of Israel and has been accepted to live alongside them. So for us, it was like God saying, that's the very territory I want you to go into. The one territory, and as you go into the story, you'll see how around wanted to...
One second. I can't answer that right now. No, I can't. Sorry about that. You were saying?
Yes, where Araunah wants to actually offer David the threshing floor for free. That's strategy. That's dangerous strategy. And it's a picture for me of a territory. If we're going to build all this stuff we're talking about, there's got to be an economy that's uncommon, that the current model cannot operate by. And the economy has to first be a people before it's actually a material economy.
Yeah.
And so I tell people, when we talk about the power to produce wealth, our focus is not wealth. Our focus is the people who can steward and manage and be trusted, because wealth is everywhere. The opportunities are everywhere, but the church has got no plug-in model to operate, administrate, control, and manage it. So there has to be a new, if the Ekklesia is going to emerge, and I saw something in Scripture that every time God moved the nation geographically, there was a wealth transfer to accommodate the new environment. And so there is no way we are going to access this new dynamic. I personally believe that one of the things that killed the power of the apostolic movement is that they had no wealth dynamic.
Mm.
There was no model for it. In fact, because of the excesses of the charismatic, they demonized it.
Mm.
They demonized the economy, they demonized finances, they demonized wealth. And that is why, except for those of us who are privileged to have accessed the apostolic, generally across the nations, it's an unheard of move.
Mm.
It's not prevalent. It's not the charismatic that everybody's heard of. It's not the Pentecostal that was public and displayed itself everywhere.
Yeah.
The apostolic was a close user group.
That was just due to the levels of control.
Absolutely. And the control got tighter because it had no economy.
Mm.
The meager resources had to be put at the apostles' feet. But there was no impact. So when this journey then began, we realized, like you said, it fits into the current iteration of where we are going. And the things that need to be built will require an uncommon economy.
Mm.
And that economy cannot come from the church. The church doesn't have it.
Doesn't have it. 1 second. I'm just going to plug in my iPad before it goes. It's interesting actually you say that, because one of the things I find that's got me thinking is about the importance of, rather than just focusing on your local region, but building essentially receptors into your community that taps you into other communities very quickly.
Yes.
It's a perspective of saying, actually, rather than trying to turn a local community into a big society, rather it's about the community being connected with the larger society that already exists.
Yes.
And so allowing the commonwealth of that society to flow through it.
Yes.
And that's something that's really sort of guided my thinking in the last few years. When you come to faith and you come into the kingdom, the society is already there.
Yes.
It's just not, in some quarters, it's not switched on.
Yes. And in fact, why that is so profound is that when Andy and I got together, the first evening we sat down and really had a long conversation. We'd both been part of another network, but at different settings of the network, so we'd never met there. So when we connected, we found that our recent processes were so similar. It was amazing. Yet, completely different dynamics. And he said, listen, I know 6, 7, 8 other people I've met, same dynamics, but in different environments. And so it told me that God had sent out a frequency into the earth. And everybody who could tune in was able to tune in their own isolated post. But the power of it will be in the switching on and connecting these realities. I believe this conversation is one of them. I mean, the fact that we've been able to interact and come together and then start hosting each other on various platforms, we are switching on stuff. It's like antennas are already there, the towers are already there, the frequencies are there, we just need to connect them. I remember with Andy in New York, I began the thought process of a kingdom blockchain and the idea of how a blockchain works. So that's basically the very concept. The fact that in a blockchain, all the systems have the same functionality, but the power that it brings together totally changes the dynamic. Something totally out of the context, not of a network, because the network systems don't work as effectively as the blockchain.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
The blockchain has no singular ownership, yet everybody owns everything.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting model just by itself. So exactly what you're saying is that if we're going to do the stuff, half the stuff we're talking about, part of the reason it failed is exactly what you said. In the charismatic model, the last major discussion of finances and economy, it was tied down to one community bursting and becoming huge.
It
doesn't It's not going with the kind of resources needed to move a kingdom. Doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Only way it works is many outposts.
That's it. Yeah,
Plugging with each other, and from that point, building this massive movement that then can get things going. I believe so too.
Yeah. And I think that's where that's going to be very difficult for those within the context of a religious church setting, because it's about getting into the current that's already flowing. Yes. It's not about creating your own current. It's not about creating pools in which to divert that into, which become resident.
Yes.
It's simply about understanding that the kingdom, what I find interesting about the kingdom when it expands is it expands along the fault lines of city-states.
Yes. Yes.
And it's along those fault lines where institutions are being disrupted by the kingdom.
Exactly.
That the commonwealth of the kingdom emerges to fill those gaps and attract people into its citizenship.
Yes. And this changes the dynamic so powerfully, because think of the old model. The model of me coming into your city to replicate what you're already doing alongside you. So you've already got it happening. Then I'm coming to build something exactly the same next door. And then we begin to engage in what I call a major African behavior, cattle rustling. You know, where I'm trying to find guys you've already trained and get them into my community to come and serve me, as opposed to functioning at my optimum. And if what I have has value for your community, I can step into your space and add value. And you can step into my space and add value. So like a kingdom blockchain, everybody's getting equal value without necessarily replicating or duplicating anything. And the dynamic becomes much more powerful by far. I believe that's really going to, like you said, the denominational structure can't fit this.
It can't fit it. It can't fit it. So in light of that, then, I guess one of the interesting things is a conversation around suitable environments to grow in. When we talk about people moving from membership to citizenship, but I think one point is understanding the challenge, and you've touched on it, the challenges of the changing environment, the nature-nurture. Now, my mind on this has moved over time when I've thought about it. And I was talking about this with Ivan in the podcast with him, about the fact that when you look to scripture and you look at the environment that the kingdom nurtured people in, or say God nurtured people into active citizenship in, it certainly wasn't a safe environment.
No, it never was.
Much of the time.
Yes.
And often those environments weren't even conducive or receptive to the prophetic word. They were often very hostile environments.
Yes.
We can talk about the challenges of Abraham having to maybe leave the familiar in order to enter into the land of Canaan, in order to begin to walk out the prophetic word. We can look at the situation with Joseph and his family and the challenges there of the sun and the moon and the whole perspective there of bowing to him, that triggering the events that caused his brothers to ostracize him and then sell him off into Egypt.
Yes.
And the foreign environment in which he gets raised in, which helps to realize the prophetic word, but still requires him to be a man of covenant in the context of his journey. We could talk about Daniel. We could talk about David and his challenges that he faced, which is wonderfully portrayed in his own history. And clearly he wasn't necessarily one that was treated with much respect in his family.
Nope.
And he wasn't treated with much respect in his community, and finally even within when he stepped up to the Philistine. So, and you see that ongoing challenge with Saul. So for me, one of the interesting things is trying to help people to understand that in the transition from membership to citizenship, or often what I call being from called to called out. There is a sense in which they need to appreciate that this new environment called the Ekklesia is not designed to put them in a bubble of safety. Rather, it's designed to help them grow stature in the midst of trial, tribulation, and challenges. So I just wanted you to speak in on that, see whether you're sort of in the same boat.
Yes,
on
we are.
this.
We absolutely
what's your
are.
thoughts?
I think this
Live
is
class rather than class.
Yes, yes. I mean, now last night, my time, we were having a conversation. One of the conversations I have on Zoom on Business Unusual, and somebody did ask the question about if God speaks and God gives us a word, what do you do when there's a delay? Okay. Yeah, what do you do when the outcome suddenly isn't coming? I said, actually, it's our nature that's the problem, not the word God gave us. I said, church has nurtured us with a gap. Seed time and harvest. Does it really work like that? No, it doesn't. We've left a huge gap in between seed time and harvest. But we've been given the picture like these are end-on-end seasons.
Yeah.
You know, you sow and you're getting. And suddenly we forget the very fact that it's a seed already portrays a process.
Yeah.
If you study the seed well, you'd understand the dynamics before it arrives at a harvest. You'd realize that there's a death season. You'd realize there's a season when roots are growing and nothing's visible. You'd understand that there's a reality that finally comes when the outcome comes. And so, in the same way, I think certain things that we need to understand differently. The term called. I once gave an illustration and asked the question, if I call you, what do you do? The response is, you come to me. So calling starts by bringing you to him, not by going anywhere. See, again, church nurture. I've been called to go and do. Hold. That's not the first step in the call. The first step in the call has never been the sent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, the first part of the call actually means you're wrongly located. And you need to be correctly positioned. So the call has a whole dynamic of changing you, has a whole dynamic of reorienting you. When you come to him, then when he sends you, you are now correctly programmed for the environment, hence the challenges that you're designed for. So sometimes the process, like I said to them today, sometimes we think God is focusing on the destination when he's currently focusing on the process, because the process is required for you to get to the destination. The very process is part of the story. It's almost like we have this idea that God called us, and then when God sends us, God walks out of the picture, leaves us on our own, and then waits to meet us at the end of the story. Not realizing that he walks with us on this process to take off what hinders the journey. I think it was last night Anderson made a profound statement when he said that God didn't particularly give Adam an assignment in terms of a purpose or what to do. It was in the working.
Yeah.
It was in the process of work that he discovered stuff. And when we begin to understand that dynamic, it helps us. It helps us realize that because of this journey and this change and this process, we are dangerous to the environment. We are needed in the environment. If the environment was conducive, we would not be needed. If the environment was fine, why send us? If everything was functional, what is the point of our existence? So our very existence says we must bring order to something. And therefore, therein lies the challenge. So the reality is that the challenge is part of the process. In fact, it brings out the best in us. But our nature in the church has prepared us for a lie that says once God says it, it'll all be great, man. This is the end. And this was part of my problem with what we discussed earlier about the prophetic.
Yeah.
Because people don't read in between the lines of the prophetic. I mean, when God talks of Cyrus, that he will rebuild Jerusalem, it hasn't been built. So there's a lot of stuff he's not saying about a city being built, a city being destroyed, people being captured, people being brought back. Just simply because he said he will rebuild, you're not reading the whole story. Sometimes a prophetic word tells you about this next year is going to be a year of great victory. Now listen carefully to that prophetic word. It's already presupposing challenge.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
You cannot have victory without a battle.
Yeah.
So the true statement there is ultimately the prophetic word is telling you no matter the battle, hold on to that outcome you were given. And that becomes the way to process.
And it becomes a way of translating hope into faith.
Yes. And I think that's for me how I would discuss that whole issue of how do you deal with this? How do you process this? How do you deal with the nature and all the stuff that's come on, is to realize that it's against you. And therefore hostile territory helps you. I remember a specific incident, met an elderly settler. We call them settlers in Kenya because these are the people who came in during the colonial days, the British, the white settlers. We call them settlers, which simply means he originally came from the UK, but now he's a Kenyan and he lives here and so on. And he gave me this story about in the early days he used to know. Those who know history will know that there was a time that Idi Amin was a dictator in Uganda.
I remember Idi Amin. I remember the film.
So in that window of time, missionaries were outlawed. So what this guy would do, he was a pilot. He had his own small plane, and he would fly a certain Norwegian missionary to go and drop Bibles and stuff in unmarked airstrips and stuff. So I asked him, isn't that a dangerous thing to do? You know, and he said, look, when I initially began that, it's the same thing I asked the missionary. But he gave me a statement that made those flights so much easier. And he said to me, the most dangerous place on earth is outside the will of God. And I became his profound model. That the issue is not danger. The issue is, why are you on this journey? That's what preserves you. It's not so much what your challenges are. It's who are you connected to within that. You know, the idea that we don't have two gods, the God of the valley and the God of the mountain. They're not two separate gods. It's the same God who places you in the valley, same God places you in the mountain. I think I used the example of Joseph last night. I said, going to prison for a good thing was the most important event towards getting to the palace. So doesn't follow format, doesn't follow the model we've been prescribed for.
But it's also interesting though, isn't it, that within the context of called to called out is about distinction.
Yes.
And unless and this is obviously, I appreciate within the apostolic order there's a lot of things about being sent, and I'm not entirely in agreement with the way that it was presented. But it's what you said earlier about this idea about the fact that the environment that you're actually called out into is not fixed. It's not an environment that it's going to require order. It's chaos requiring the order that has been worked out in you in that environment. And it's interesting, isn't it, that unless you're willing to journey through that process, you will not be found to be distinct enough to be seen as necessary for that environment.
There you go. And the funny thing is this, and I think that's one of the struggles of the charismatic / apostolic. This false idea that staying within the church environment will prepare you perfectly. So that one day you'll go and accomplish. So we have this holding pattern where nobody ever moves. Because you will never find a scenario where your spiritual father or oversight believes you're ready.
Yeah.
Because there's always going to be flaws. So the idea is that this becomes actually a crippling process that makes you more and more ineffective over time, because the design is supposed to be worked out in the challenge. But we created this idea that if you are trained enough, if you stay here and obey everything
and do enough programs,
yes, then one day you'll be ready.
Thank you for joining our fireside talk about the kingdom. My name is Frederick Tobun, and I hope this podcast has been a blessing to you. If you'd like to continue to receive fresh insight into the kingdom, click the notification bell to follow us. For further information about the kingdom, visit our website www.unlockthekingdomwithinyou.com to download your free ebook. See you soon.